For centuries, hieroglyphs were believed to be mere symbols of language and history. But what if they were something more, something alive? At an excavation site near Abydos, a group of scientists from the Heliopolis Genetic Institute uncovered a tomb unlike any other. The chamber's walls were covered in hieroglyphs that glowed faintly under black light, their inscriptions eerily mathematical. Dr. Yasmin Darwish, a molecular biologist on the team, initially dismissed them as artistic embellishments until she noticed a familiar pattern. Not words. DNA sequences. Someone in ancient Egypt had left behind a genetic code, not for preservation but for creation. Dr. Yasmin Darwish felt her breath catch as she stared at the intricate hieroglyphs. The symbols weren't just decorative. They followed the precise arrangement of nucleotides, adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. It was a genetic blueprint, preserved for over 4,000 years. She quickly snapped a picture and sent it to her colleague, Dr. Elias Radwin, an expert in ancient languages and bioinformatics. Within an hour, Elias responded with a mix of excitement and unease. These sequences, they form a complete genome. But not just any genome. This isn't human. The realization sent a shiver down Yasmin's spine. If these glyphs encoded a being, then who or what were the ancient Egyptians trying to create? Further analysis revealed something even more perplexing. The sequences weren't random. They contained enhancements, gene clusters that suggested extreme longevity, regenerative abilities, and heightened cognitive function. It was as if someone had been engineering superhumans long before modern genetics even existed. The team worked through the night, translating the tomb's inscriptions. One passage stood out. "They shall rise again when the stars align, the guardians of Maat, forged by the hands of Netjeru, the gods." Legend spoke of pharaohs as divine beings, descendants of the gods themselves. Could it have been literal? Could the ancient rulers of Egypt have used this genetic knowledge to modify themselves? Yasmin and Elias submitted their findings for peer review, but before they could publish, an unexpected visitor arrived at their lab, a man in a crisp suit, carrying a black folder. "I'm Colonel Dawes," he said. "The UN Security Council has taken an interest in your research. We need you to come with us." Yasmin exchanged a glance with Elias. They had uncovered something far beyond archaeology. Someone had been watching and now they wanted to control it. The last thing Yasmin saw before being escorted into a black SUV was her laptop screen, where the genetic sequence finished running. The final analysis confirmed what she feared. The hieroglyphic DNA codes weren't just for ancient superhumans. They were still active, waiting for the right conditions to be reactivated. And someone somewhere was already trying. The SUV sped through the desert night, its tinted windows concealing the tension inside. Yasmin clutched her tablet, where the last sequence of the genetic code still flickered on the screen. Elias sat beside her, silent but tense. Across from them, Colonel Dawes observed them with a measured stare. "We've been monitoring sites like Abydos for years," Dawes finally said. "You're not the first to stumble upon genetic inscriptions. But you're the first to decode them correctly." Yasmin's pulse quickened. "There are other sites." Dawes nodded. "This isn't just about Egypt. We've found similar genetic markers embedded in Sumerian tablets, Mayan stelae, even in the carvings of Göbekli Tepe. Someone or something was experimenting with human DNA long before our recorded history." Elias leaned forward. "What are you saying? That the gods of ancient civilizations were actually genetic engineers?" Dawes didn't blink. "I'm saying your discovery just confirmed a theory we've been chasing for decades. The hieroglyphs you found, they aren't just records. They're instructions." Yasmin's stomach twisted. "Instructions for what?" Dawes tapped his folder. "For activating the genetic enhancements. For creating what ancient texts refer to as the sons of the sky." He sighed. "And unfortunately, we're not the only ones who figured that out." A pit formed in Yasmin's stomach. "Who else?" Dawes hesitated. "An organization called the Covenant of Ra, an underground sect that believes the ancient pharaohs were the first step toward godhood. They've been collecting genetic relics for years, and we believe they have everything except for one key component: your translation." Elias cursed under his breath. "And now that we've published it, they'll come for us." Dawes gave a slow nod. "That's why we're moving you to a secure facility. You're no longer just scientists. You're now the only people standing between humanity and a genetic resurrection we might not be ready for." The SUV turned down an empty desert road, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Yasmin stared out the window, her mind racing. If the genetic codes were real, if someone had already begun reassembling them, what kind of being would emerge from history's greatest secret? And would they see humanity as descendants or mistakes? The convoy pressed forward, cutting through the silent dunes under a moonless sky. Yasmin tapped on her tablet, running the last sequence one more time. The more she stared at the code, the more it felt like a message, deliberately structured, like someone had meant for it to be found. "But why now?" Elias nudged her arm. "You're thinking it too, aren't you?" She looked up. "Thinking what?" He lowered his voice. "That maybe the Covenant of RA aren't the only ones trying to activate these genes. What if someone left this knowledge behind on purpose? A contingency plan." Dawes frowned. "A contingency for what?" Before Yasmin could answer, the SUV jolted violently. An explosion erupted ahead, sending fire into the sky. "Ambush!" the driver shouted. Tires screeched as the convoy swerved. Gunfire erupted from the dunes. Shadowy figures emerged from the sands, armed and advancing fast. Yasmin's heart pounded. The Covenant of RA had found them. Dawes unholstered his weapon. "Stay down." But before Yasmin could duck, a figure leapt onto the hood of the SUV. Clad in desert robes, his eyes glowed an unnatural gold in the darkness. With inhuman strength, he ripped the windshield clean off, tossing it aside like paper. Yasmin screamed. The man's face was carved with ancient markings, hieroglyphic tattoos that pulsed faintly beneath his skin. He wasn't just one of them. He was one of the Superhumans. Dawes fired, but the bullets barely slowed the attacker. With terrifying speed, the man reached inside and grabbed Elias by the throat, lifting him effortlessly. "Where is the key?" the man growled, his voice resonating like two voices speaking at once. "You have deciphered the code. Where is the key to the awakening?" Elias choked, struggling against the impossible strength. Yasmin's mind raced. Key: the last sequence was incomplete. A missing gene pair, a final activation sequence. The Covenant didn't have it yet. Summoning her courage, Yasmin grabbed a scalpel from her bag and drove it into the man's forearm. He barely flinched, but for a split second, his grip loosened. Dawes seized the moment, firing point-blank at the attacker's eye. This time the Superhuman staggered back, hissing in pain. "Oh, shouted. Yasmin grabbed Elias and tumbled out of the SUV. They sprinted across the dunes as chaos erupted behind them, gunfire, explosions, the inhuman roars of beings who should not exist. Elias coughed, gasping. "We need to destroy it." "Code. All of it." Yasmin shook her head. "Well, we need to understand it first. Someone already activated them. If we destroy the code, we might lose our only way to stop them." Dawes caught up, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. "We need to keep moving. There's a UN bunker 10 kilometers east. If we make it, we can warn the world." Yasmin glanced back. The attackers were regrouping, scanning the dunes. They wouldn't stop hunting. The genetic resurrection had already begun, and humanity was running out of time. Yasmin, Elias, and Dawes moved fast, their boots sinking into the desert sands. Every few minutes, Yasmin glanced back, half expecting the glowing-eyed Superhuman to come tearing through the dunes after them. The attack had been a message. The Covenant of RA was ahead of them. They had already awakened one. But how many more were there? Dawes pressed a finger to his earpiece. "Command, this is Echo 1. The convoy is compromised. We are proceeding to extraction point Theta. Threat is confirmed." "Repeat, the threat is confirmed." Static. Then a distorted voice. Negative Echo 1. Extraction compromised. Enemy forces already en route. Find the failsafe. Repeat, find the failsafe. Dawes cursed under his breath. They're already moving to erase us. Yasmin's heart pounded. What failsafe? Dawes didn't answer immediately. He glanced at Elias before lowering his voice. There's another site. A hidden chamber. The original containment facility. Elias's eyes widened. A site where the original superhumans were sealed away. Dawes nodded grimly. The Covenant of RA doesn't just want the code. They want to finish what the Pharaohs started. And if they find the facility first. A sharp crack echoed through the night. Gunfire. Yasmin dove behind a rock as bullets tore through the sand around them. The Covenant had tracked them. From the dunes, 4 figures emerged, 3 human, and 1 distinctly not. The golden-eyed superhuman was leading them. His wounds had healed, and his movements were faster now, sharper. His bare skin shimmered in the moonlight. His hieroglyphic tattoos glowing like embers. Dawes fired, but the bullets barely slowed the figure. This wasn't just a modified human. This was something else entirely. Yasmin clutched Elias's arm. We need to split up. You head east. I'll draw them away. Elias shook his head violently. No way. But before he could argue, Yasmin grabbed a flare from Dawes's belt, ignited it, and hurled it into the night. The sudden burst of light sent shadows flickering across the dunes, momentarily confusing the attackers. In that instant, Yasmin sprinted in the opposite direction. The golden-eyed superhuman turned. His gaze locking onto her. He smiled. And then he moved. Not ran, moved. In a blur of motion. He vanished from the spot, reappearing just meters behind her. Yasmin's lungs burned as she pushed forward. But it was hopeless. He was too fast. Suddenly he was in front of her. Yasmin skidded to a stop, her breath catching. The superhuman tilted his head, examining her like a puzzle he had already solved. You deciphered the code, he said. His voice layered, as if more than one person was speaking through him. You are the key to the awakening. Yasmin clenched her fists. What are you? His golden eyes burned brighter. We are the forgotten. The first gods. He lunged. And then something exploded behind him. A blast of sand and fire ripped the ground apart, sending Yasmin sprawling. A shadow loomed over her. Dawes. He had thrown a grenade directly at the superhuman's back. When? He roared. Yasmin didn't need to be told twice. She scrambled up and bolted as the superhuman emerged from the flames, completely unharmed. But now he wasn't smiling. He was angry. Yasmin, Elias, and Dawes ran into the darkness, toward the only place that could hold the answer. The original containment site, where the ancient Egyptians had sealed away something they feared more than death itself. Something that had just begun to wake up. The team ran until the sand beneath them gave way to stone. Yasmin skidded to a halt, catching her breath as she turned to see what they had reached. It was a doorway, half buried under centuries of shifting dunes. Unlike the surrounding ruins, this was intact, a massive slab of black basalt, lined with hieroglyphs that shimmered faintly under the moonlight. Elias ran his fingers across the carvings. This is older than the pyramids. Dawes pushed against the door, but it wouldn't budge. Yasmin stepped forward, studying the symbols. They weren't standard Egyptian hieroglyphs. These were genetic markers, just like those they had discovered in the tomb. This isn't a tomb, she murmured. It's a vault. Behind them the wind shifted. A low growl carried across the dunes. The golden-eyed superhuman had found them. Dawes pulled his gun. We don't have time for this, get it open. Yasmin's heart pounded. She traced her fingers along the inscriptions, searching for something, anything that would activate the mechanism. Ancient Egyptians didn't just build stone doors. They engineered them. Her eyes locked onto a sequence at the center of the door, 4 symbols arranged in a familiar pattern. Codon sequence. She inhaled sharply. They weren't just meant to be read. They were meant to be spoken. Mut Ankh Jet Ren, she whispered. Life. Eternity. Stability. The vault rumbled. With a deep groan of shifting stone, the massive door slid open, revealing a dark passageway leading down. A rush of cold, stale air hit them like a wave. Dawes grabbed Yasmin's wrist. Oh. They sprinted inside just as the golden-eyed figure charged forward. The door slammed shut behind them, sealing them in. For a moment, silence. Yasmin gasped, trying to slow her breathing. The darkness was suffocating, broken only by Elias's flashlight. Then Dawes spoke. Look. The beam of light swept over the walls, revealing rows of massive stone sarcophagi. Each was carved with hieroglyphic DNA codes, pulsing faintly as if alive. Elias swallowed hard. These aren't coffins. Yasmin stepped closer. Through a narrow glass panel in one of the sarcophagi, she saw a figure inside, its skin dark bronze, muscles unnaturally defined, hieroglyphic tattoos covering its body. Its eyes were open, but it wasn't moving. Dawes exhaled. They weren't buried. They were sealed away. The realization sent a chill down Yasmin's spine. The ancient Egyptians hadn't just experimented with genetic engineering. They had created something they couldn't control. And then they had done the only thing left to do. They had locked them away. Elias checked the inscriptions. Some of these have been opened already. Dawes tensed. How many? Elias's face paled. At least 10. Yasmin whispered. Then we're already too late. A sound echoed in the darkness, a low, inhuman whisper. The vault was not empty. Something had never left. The whispering grew, curling through the vault like an unseen force. It wasn't just one voice. It was many. Elias swung the flashlight wildly, its beam flickering across the massive chamber. The sarcophagi loomed like silent sentinels, their glass panels fogged over from the inside. Then a breath. Not theirs. A slow, measured inhalation from somewhere deep in the darkness. Yasmin grabbed Elias's arm. Move. Dawes raised his weapon, scanning the room. Where's the exit? Before anyone could answer, one of the sarcophagi creaked open. The stone lid slid aside with agonizing slowness, revealing a figure rising from within. It was a man or something close to one. His skin gleamed like polished obsidian, his body sculpted like an ancient statue. His hieroglyphic tattoos pulsed with golden light, the same glow they had seen in the desert warrior outside. But his eyes, they weren't gold. They were black voids, reflecting nothing but the flickering light of the vault. Yasmin stepped back, her breath shallow. It's not just DNA modifications. Something else. Elias whispered they were never just human. The figure turned toward them, his neck cracking as if waking from centuries of slumber. His lips parted, and when he spoke, the words weren't his. The cycle returns. The gods awaken. The vault shook. All around them, other sarcophagi shifted, lids trembling, stone grating against stone. The whispers became voices, rising in a chant, a forgotten tongue that Yasmin's mind struggled to comprehend. Dawes took aim. We have to stop this now. He fired. The bullet struck the figure's forehead and disintegrated on impact. The being didn't even flinch. He simply looked at them, and in that instant, Yasmin felt something pressing against her mind, a presence, vast and ancient. Memories that weren't her own flooded her thoughts. Time before pyramids, before the Pharaohs, before recorded history. These beings had ruled the earth once, not as kings but as gods. And humanity had sealed them away because they were too powerful. Elias grabbed her arm, snapping her out of the trance. Yasmin, we have to go. The awakened being took a step forward, the golden glow of his hieroglyphs intensifying. Then, in a voice that sent pure terror down Yasmin's spine, he spoke. Your kind has forgotten its place. It is time to remember. The other sarcophagi began to open. The vault was no longer a tomb. It was a battlefield waiting to happen.